Hello, forensic students. Mr. Spears here, going to go over the second part of the blood spatter evidence notes from the other day. You should have this PowerPoint already in your Google Classroom, which you can refer to, and there will be a little assessment at the end, so you might want to make sure you jot some things down or have the ability to go back and look at that. All right, let's get into the notes. So, blood spatter evidence. A field of forensics investigation that deals with what the blood found at a crime scene looks like, particularly the patterns that they create and what the blood stains look like. All this is based on the laws of physics and how fluids, which blood is a fluid, acts under those conditions. So, blood droplet characteristics. A blood remains spherical when it's falling. Once the blood impacts with the surface, a stain is formed. The falling droplets from the same height are going to produce about the same kind of stain. Okay, so these little extra coming off of the blood stain are called spines. And again, if they're from the same height in the same direction, the spines will look pretty much the same. So we're going to talk about how the shape and characteristics of these drops, these stains change as they move or fall from a different height. Okay, most drop contains about 0.05 cc's of fluid, not a whole lot. Some may be as small as 0.03, some may be as big as 0.15. It all depends upon the surface it's coming from, like if it's running off of or dripping off of a knife, or if it's dripping off of paper, or if it's coming from a wound. All those things are going to determine how big the drop is um, and how much they fall. Also, the area of impact is called the target, so that target surface is going to have some effect as well on what kind of shape the blood takes when it leaves its pattern. Okay, conditions affecting the blood drop. Obviously, the size of the droplet, the bigger the droplet, the more blood that's going to hit, the different kinds of stains you're going to leave. Smaller droplets are going to leave smaller stains. The angle of impact. Are they round droplets? Are they oblong droplets? And that'll tell you from where the blood came and the angle that it hit the floor at. The velocity at which the blood droplet left its origin. Okay, how fast was it going when it hit the floor? Was it just a drip? Was it thrown off the object? Was it an arterial bleed where it was coming from an artery and being pumped out by the heart? All those kind of things you're going to be able to tell by the blood drops. The height from which it fell, the texture of the target surface. Okay, so obviously on glass or plastic, the droplets are going to have smoother edges. Okay, on rougher surface, they'll produce more of that scalloping or spines that you can get on those edges. So that'll all have an effect. Okay, questions that can be answered by interpreting the blood spatter. The distance between the target surface and the origin. Okay, was the person standing? Were they sitting? Um, did the blood come off the table? All those kind of things you can tell by the drop. The point of origin. Where in the room was the person, or where in the room did that blood come from? The movement or direction of a person. If a person who is dripping blood moves, you can tell the direction they were moving and how fast. The number of blows or shots, depending upon the pattern of the stains, you can tell, was there 3 swings with a hammer? Was it 1 swing with a hammer? You can tell those different things by what's called cast off. We'll get into that a little bit more later. The type and direction of impact that's produced by the bloodshed. Okay, again, were they at an angle? Were they straight down? The position of the victim or the object during the bloodshed. Again, where they were in the room, were they standing in that thing, and whether or not the victim was moving or moved after they started bleeding or not. Okay, some of this terminology now, you should have seen all of these words when you did the bloodstain vocabulary earlier, so we'll just go over them quickly. So the angle of impact is the angle at which the blood strikes the target surface. If it falls straight down, that's 90 degrees. 80 degrees, not quite straight down. An angle 30 degrees means the blood has probably traveled a longer distance as it's been falling from that object. It's not falling straight down. So the angle that the blood strikes the surface at, 90 degrees, is straight down. Blood transfer, okay, when the bloody object comes in contact with another surface. Back spatter, that's blood that comes directly back from the source of energy. Okay? Cast off, blood that comes from an object in motion. So like if I hit somebody with a hammer and it becomes bloody, as I swing that hammer, blood is going to be thrown off the hammer. That's cast off. Okay? And you can tell that very distinctly when you're looking at blood stain patterns. Okay, contact stain. When blood stains caused by contact between a wet surface that has blood on it and a second surface that may or may not have blood on it. Okay, you step in a pool of blood, you're going to make a contact stain on the shoe, and also you're going to leave it a contact stain in the on the floor where the blood was. Then there may be transfer. If I take another step, maybe I leave a footprint behind that you can see. As in the picture down here, you can see the footprint. That is a transfer stain. Obviously, the blood didn't form that way. It was left there by a person's foot. Oh, this is a tricky one. The difference between a swipe and a wipe. Okay, so the swipe is if I'm bleeding, my arm's bleeding, and I rub up against a wall. Okay, I'm going to leave a blood stain on that wall. That's a swipe because my arm is wet. It's coming in contact with a surface that didn't have blood on it. So that's a swipe. A wipe is there's blood already there. Maybe I step in it, my foot slides. Okay, so I'm an object of my foot moving through that wet stain. Or I take a towel and try and wipe up the stain. Okay, that's a wipe. A non-blood bearing object moves through the wet blood stain, altering its appearance. Okay, swipes and wipes. Directionality relates to the direction the blood drop is traveling. Okay, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So the direction that the drop was moving, its directionality. Terminal velocity, a physics term here. When an object falls through the air, as it falls, it meets more air resistance. At some point, the air resistance counteracts all of gravity, and the object begins or stops accelerating, and so it now is traveling at a constant velocity. That constant velocity is called the object's terminal velocity, and it's approximately 25 feet per second, so it is pretty fast. We usually break the velocity of blood into three categories. High velocity, greater than that 25 meters per second. And that could come from cast off. It could come from a gunshot. Usually at 100 feet per second or more, it gives a fine mist appearance instead of more of a solid droplets. Medium velocity, this is usually blood that has fallen from like a wound of a person standing between 5 and 25 feet per second. And then low velocity is less than 5 feet per second. So in that case, the blood did not fall very far or was traveling at a very low velocity. Okay, the shape of the blood drop is going to help us immensely. Again, if it's a round drop, that means it fell straight down at a 90-degree angle. The less the angle, the longer the blood drop is going to become. And we can actually tell how far that blood drop came using this formula. Now, this formula is not correct. Okay, it's not length over width. It should be width over length. Okay, let me say that again. This formula, inverse sine, should be width over length. On your calculator or your phone, you can use the inverse sine. And let me go to the next slide. We can show you how to do that. Okay, so at 90 degrees, you get a round drop. So this one probably is just a little bit off at 90. You can see it's not quite perfectly round, and you got spines only kind of on one side. So it's probably close to 90, but not exactly actually 90. When we measure the length of the blood drop, or the blood spatter, and the width of it, if we take the width, let's say this width was 0.5 centimeters, and this length was 1 centimeter. So if we put that into a calculator using the inverse sine function, we go inverse sine 0.5 over 1 and hit equals. That'll tell us that this angle hit at, or this blood drop hit at approximately a 30-degree angle. Okay. And at 30 degrees, that's usually when you start seeing these tails come off. As the blood hits, some of the blood continues to go at the top of the drop and creates these tails. These tails are always in the direction the blood is traveling. Okay, so this blood came from up here, hit, and this tail is the blood that keeps going. So the tails will point to the direction the blood came from. And that's going to be important when we're trying to determine where in the room the blood source was. Okay, blood patterns. The harder and less porous the surface, the less the drop breaks apart. It's going to stay more clumped together, so you're going to get less of the spines or the tails. Softer surfaces will make it break apart. The end point, again, shows the direction that the blood traveled. So all of these bloods, see the endpoints are here and here and here. So all this blood was coming from here, traveling in this direction. And we're going to show you how that works. Okay, so if I look at all these blood drops, I'll look at the tails, and I point back from where the tails were. If I took all those blood drops and trace their tails, point them back to where they're going, they're going to lead me to where they came from. And if I then use the inverse sine, I can tell the angle that they were traveling. So this one is a less angle than this one and this one. So this one might be 45 degrees. This one might be, let's say, 30 degrees. This one might be 25 degrees. So the further away they are, the longer they become, the skinnier they become, and the longer they become. But I can use those angles to tell where, again, or how high up they were when they came. So I can get both the location and the height based on where the tails of those blood stains, and using that inverse sine of the blood stains. Okay, let's talk about blood evidence. Blood itself is a class evidence, right? Blood type, you can eliminate some suspects, you can get a group of suspects, but blood type is a class. Now, if you get DNA from that blood, then obviously that's individual. But the blood stain patterns are considered circumstantial evidence. Okay? They have to be interpreted by someone. So in a court, you can argue, well, my findings put the victim here. They're pretty generally accepted. The basic facts of the direction of the blood and where the blood came from, was it cast off? Those are pretty hard to dispute. but some cases will try and argue those facts, but they are circumstantial. They're not class or individual. Okay. Lastly, we talked earlier, Mr. Mountney talked earlier about serology, which is the study of all bodily fluids, not just blood. We've been concentrating on blood, but there are other bodily fluids that could be found at a crime scene. So there are about 80% of the population are called secretors. That means in their other bodily fluids other than blood, they contain the blood type antigens. Okay, so in the saliva, the semen, gastric juices, bile, anything that may come from the body other than blood, including sweat, you can get in 80% of the people determine their blood type from those secretions. Okay, so if most people are secretors, their blood antigens will also be in their other bodily fluids. All right, so that's all I have for this section. There is going to be a little lesson assessment along with this that you should complete, about 7 questions. Please refer back to the notes or rewatch this video if you need to. In the meantime, keep up the hard work. Stay safe. If you have any questions or concerns, reach out to either Mr. Mountney or myself, and we will be more than happy to help you out. Don't forget, you can still make up any work that you're missing. So let's finish these last few weeks moving forward and getting that work completed. Okay, until next time,